My talk is on who's afraid of Urdish and Urdi. And all dinosaurs of whatever age are afraid of both. But first, let's define what they are. Urdish is defined as the use of Urdu and English in utterances and written sentences. Technically, this is called code switching. And we keep saying, either use Urdu or use English, don't use both. Well, I'm trying to give an idea that this is a prejudice, and that, in fact, it is fine to use both. I hope it does not sound too much to the linguistic dinosaurs, and any age, we can all be linguistic dinosaurs. Urdi refers to two distinct phenomena. The first is the use of words of Hindi in Urdu, chinta and kasht and so on, sundar, etc. And the other one is the use of the sounds, phonemes, of Hindi in Urdu, such as ga for gha and so on. Now, the first is seen as a problem in Pakistan. The second is mostly seen as a problem in India. Let's see a little more. So the first problem which I'm talking about, code switching, we've always been doing it. There is historical record. And let me just show you this record from England. This is code switching between Norman French and Middle English, Chaucer's English. And this is Richard Kingston, Dean of Windsor, who wrote a letter to King Henry IV on 13th of September 1403 in Norman French. In the middle of this letter, he switches to English, and he probably did this in conversation also. So he says, please a vostra très gracieux signorie entendre que aujourd'hui après-noon. This is the French part. And then he switches much later, 3 dots for that. Wherefore, for God's sake, thinketh on your best friend. The first is, may it please your most gracious lordship to understand that today afternoon. Then he reports an event. And then he says, wherefore, for God's sake, think of your best friend. So you see, when he gets emotional, he switches to English, which is probably just what he did in real life. Now, here is a very famous verse attributed to Amir Khusro, although there is doubt whether he actually wrote it or not. But this is 1253 to 1325. Zahale miski makan tagaful. I don't want to burden you with the whole thing, but just think of these lines here. These lines here. Shaban hijran daraz chu zulf. Now this is Persian. Shaban hijran daraz chu zulf. Or roze waslat chu umr kohta. The night of separation, like your tresses, is as long as your long tresses. This is to the girl beloved. And the other thing, that the day of meeting is as short as life itself. But then look at the next line. Next line is, Sakhi piya ko jo main na dekhun, to kaise kaatun andheri ratiyan. Not only that the other line is in Hindi Urdu, the ancestor of these two languages, and this is the same language, I would like to say, but in the 18th century, they became two languages. Not only this, but the first one is in the Persian tradition. That is a male poet addressing a girl beloved or a boy beloved. The second one, on the other hand, is in the Hindi tradition. That is to say, a girl talking to a girl about her male lover, or a girl talking about a male lover. Let's go on to the next one. This is how it will look in Persian. The red is in Persian and the blue is in Hindi Urdu. I don't, again, want to read the whole thing out. It's beautiful. Whether it is by Mir Khusro or not, just enjoy it sometime later. Now, this is a very unusual case, because this is in 3 languages. And this is by a 17th century poet of Pashto poet, and Mawzullah Khan Muhammad, Sajan Zulfo Karam ke Abshab Lama Ghariba Chekhwa Pakhwade. The blue one is in Hindi Urdu, the red one is in Persian, and the green is in Pashto. Qasam ba mushaf jo gham khushi so ladare maine na hir zamade. My beloved, out of graciousness and favor, has bestowed her favors upon me. Khwa pakhwa is side to side with me, is lying with me. And I swear on her radiant countenance that in ecstasy I have forgotten sorrow. This is in 3 languages. So code switching is not only in 2, it may be in 3, and there are several, and other countries also have it in history. Now, Pakistani Indian English, I'm sure every one of you can provide examples of that. The, baby raat bhar rota raha, and kharbuzas and so on. We were having juicy kharbuzas, something which you would say illiterate, which many people my age actually say this is illiterate. These kids cannot speak either English or Urdu. Well, that's not true, because code switching research says rather than representing deviant behavior is actually suggestive indicator of the degree of bilingual and trilingual and multilingual competence. That's what research says now. So it is people who do it in real life, that's because they are at home in both languages. It is not that they don't do it, they do it because they can't find words. Next one. That's the Urdish part of it, the Urdu and English part of it. The second part of which people are afraid are the Urdi part of it, which in India, the dimension is different. In Pakistan, the dimension is different. In India, it is that people switch to use the sounds of Hindi. In Pakistan, sometimes some people use words of what is called Hindi. But this used to be the same language, and it had different names. Hindi is one of its oldest names. Every one of them is associated with their associations. Hindi, Dehlvi, Hindui, Hindvi, Gujri, Dakkani, Hindustan. This language, Khadi Boli, has been called all these names. Urdu comes much later. It's been called all these names. The associations, as you can see, Hindi associated with India, with the Hindus, Dehlvi with Delhi, Hindvi, Hindui again with India and the Hindus. Gujri, this language is called Gujri. Although there is another language which is also called Gujri, spoken in Pakistan also. But this language is also being called this language. It has been called Gujri. So all of them, including Dakkan, Deccani, are associated with either an area or with an identity. And there is an ideological bias. If you don't want Indianness, etc., you would not like the name Hindi. And if you don't want to be known by a region, you would not like the name Dakkani, etc. And these names, most of them, are out of fashion. Hindustan was used by foreigners. And it was English travelers in the 17th century used to call it that. But I haven't finished. There are other names. One name for this language used to be called Moors. And, but that for a very short time, of course, the ideological bias is Muslim identity, but it was the kind of pidgin used by English officers when talking to their servants, and they used to call it Moors. But the basic language was the same. Most Englishmen used to call it Hindustani. It was the language of the army in India also. But Hindustani, the word has not been used only by the English. The word has been used for the first reference I have got is to Zahiruddin Muhammad Babur in Tuske Babri in Turkey. In Turkish language, he uses this word. And then there is Rekhta, assumes that Persian is the standard language, implying the inferiority of India's local languages. And Urdu comes in the 18th century. Muslim identity, Pakistani identity, and it is associated with Mughal camps, with conquest, and so on. This language does not really have a name. So what happened? In the 18th century, two movements went on. The first was the Persianization and Islamization of Khadi Boli. The second was the Hinduization of the same Khadi Boli. So in the first one, which is 1750 to 1900, this was a class movement, by the way. Not a religious movement, but a class movement. Here was a class losing Persian, so it was Persianizing Urdu to be a symbol of that class. Sanskritic words were purged out, words of local dialects were also purged out. In place of the above, words of Persian, Arabic were added. Literary, cultural allusions, metaphors, symbols would predominantly be Iranian and Islamic culture. Allusions to the Indian landscape were replaced by references to an idealized, conventionalized Iranian landscape. So it is like this that you're not talking about the bulbul, you are talking about bahar, you're not talking about barsat, you're not talking about the koel. And the amorous conventions of Indian poetry, which I talked about earlier, such as the girl, the woman expressing love for the man, were replaced by Iranian ones. That is, a man expressing love for either a boy or a girl, beloved of indeterminate gender. This is what happened. Next one, the Hinduization of Khadi Boli. This was, in a sense, it was to consolidate an identity, the Hindu identity in India, started in 1803, although Rani Ketki ki Kahani was written by Insha at the same time, but that was a joke. This one was Lalluji Lal Kavi wrote Prem Sagar, and he took out the Persian words and the Arabic words, etc., and wrote it in the Devanagari script. And this was, Prem Sagar became a sort of a prototype for the kind of language which would be used. So this is the Sanskritization of Khadi Boli. Ramchandra Shukla, after that, he gave a sort of a history, and in that history he said, this is Hindi and this is not Hindi. And in that he removed all the Muslim poets. Whereas earlier, Abhi Hayat does not have Hindu poets in it. Women and Hindus are ignored. So it's not one side, it happened on both sides. Sanskritization is going on even now. You add Sanskrit words instead of the commonly known words. And now the Urdi part, the one which the Indian Muslim second generation is so worried about. See, Hindi does not have, Hindi has ga, pa, kha, ka, and ja. Urdu has gha, fa, kha, pa, and 4 symbols, graphemes, for the sound z. Now what happens? The first generation of speakers, that's to say people of 60 years and above, they would proudly use the Urdu ghain, fe, kha, pa, and others graphemes, that's to say the letters, and the phonemes, that is to say the sounds, because they knew the Urdu alphabet. Then the knowledge of the alphabet slowly died, eroded. So the second generation, which is between 30 to 59 years old, if they write in the Devanagari script, which they very often do, what happens is that they put bindis. Bindis are dots. So the dots are, that is to say, ghain, as you can see, the symbol of this ghain is this one. This is the phonetic symbol. And what is happening? A dot is put below it. And similarly, you can see dots below fa. If you put a dot below pa, it becomes fa. If you put a dot below ka, it becomes kha. And if you put a dot below ka, it becomes pa. And if you put a dot below za, below ja, it becomes za. So julamu hoyoram becomes zulm huwa, and so on. So that is how this is not a third generation. This is the second generation, very conscious of Muslim identity, Urdu identity, and so they are putting the bindis. But the third generation, this is somebody else's research, by the way, on the third generation in Delhi. And Rizwan Ahmed, who has written this, says that actually the third generation, Delhi, live in slums and are not proud of Urdu. They are not proud of the identity of Urdu because it is a subordinated identity, because they are poor and because they live in those poor areas. So they do not use the gha, etc. They use the same Hindi phonemes, Hindi sounds, ga, pa, ka, and so on. So to sum up, in the poor areas of Delhi, Muslim children avoid using the special phonemes of Urdu in order to assimilate with their Hindi using peers. Identity-conscious Muslims use dots, bindis, and the Devanagari graphemes to indicate their Muslim identity. And the efforts to preserve features of Urdu are the articulation of the second generation, who believe that placing bindis under the graphemes is the best way to hand down Urdu in its correct form to the next generation. However, for generation 3, bindis cannot override the stigma attached to the phonemes that they are supposed to represent on paper. So in Pakistan, there's a lot of worry about the use of words like chinta and prem, etc. First of all, it's not really a lot, but this worry is groundless. Languages change, and as you know, it was the same language which became Persianized and became Sanskritized later in the 18th century. So if somebody is using chinta, it is a word which was deliberately thrown out. 4,000 words were thrown out during the 18th, 19th centuries. So if they're using that, they're simply reclaiming a word which belongs to this language. And the same would be true about India. Okay, so the conclusion is, change, you see, we are always against change. We are afraid of change. Linguistic change, the dinosaurs are all afraid of it. Change has always been seen as threatening, and linguistic change is not an exception at all. Indeed, linguistic change has always been considered more threatening than most other changes. So in the end, what I would suggest is that languages in which the change is not there, they become classics, all right, but they don't remain living languages. If you want to make Urdu, let Urdu remain a living language, accept code switching and borrowing and substitution and Urdi and Urdish, etc., as part of things which we do. So next time somebody says, well, baby raat bhar roti rahi, don't reach out for something to hit the person. Thanks very much indeed.